Test, test. Okay. All right, I guess we'll get started. So we're in Zechariah 5, and I know we didn't meet last week. So just to kind of recap real quick, we're in the middle of the 8 visions in Zechariah. We finished vision 6 last time, which is the first part of chapter 5, and so we'll be into vision 7 and 8 tonight. So just to kind of remind you, so the way the visions work, they start from a very far view, and then they kind of pan in closer. So vision 1 is sort of a universal vision. Vision 2 is an international vision. Vision 3 gets more down into Judah. 4 and 5 are specifically in Jerusalem, and that's the center of the whole, all of the visions is 4 and 5. 6 then comes back out more towards Judah, and then 7 and 8 are going to be international and then universal again. So what he's doing in visions, I'm having to count them in my head, 6 that we covered last time, and then now in 7, has to do with eliminating sin from the people. So if you kind of remember 4 and 5, which are the 2 central visions, 4 was about reinstituting the high priest, so the high priest is legitimate. And then vision 5 was about the temple being legitimate. And so that's what those 2 are about. So as you get into now 6 and 7, basically what he's saying is, okay, now that God has agreed to come back and dwell in the city, you now have a high priest again. You got to get rid of all the sin. Otherwise, you're going to go back into exile like your ancestors did. So with that in mind, we'll jump into vision 7, which is in chapter 5, beginning in verse 5. Okay, so it says, then the angel who talked with me, remember the angel that keeps talking to him in each of these visions is Christ. Even though he's called an angel, that's who he is. So it says, the angel who talked with me came out and said to me, lift your eyes now and see what this is that goes forth. So Christ is telling Zechariah to look at something and see what it is. So verse 6, it says, so I asked, what is it? And he said, it is a basket that is going forth. So all Zechariah knows right now is he's seeing a basket going out. And then it says, he also said, this is their resemblance throughout the earth. And the New King James uses the word resemblance there, but other translations use the word iniquity. And that's really what it's referring to. So what you have learned is the contents of the basket is the iniquity, or if you want to say the sin of the people. So you've got this basket, and metaphorically contained in the basket is the sin of the people, okay? All right, so then it says, here is a lead disc lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the basket. All right, so there's a woman in the basket, and the woman represents sin. And this is going to be very reminiscent of what you read in Revelation when you get to that, because the same idea is picked up in Revelation when the Babylon is called the great prostitute, sitting on many waters. It's also referred to as Babylon the Great, the mother of the prostitutes, and the earth's abominations. So Revelation, John picks up with the same idea, kind of reuses it in the same context, talking about sin in Revelation, and refers to it as a woman or a prostitute again at that time. So you have a woman here in a basket representing sin, but over the top of the basket is a lead lid. And so lead is the cheapest of all the metals. And so you're kind of having a parallel or a contrast between the metal that you use to cap sin as opposed to the metal that's set over the mercy seat. So the metal in the mercy seat with the cherubim sitting over it was all made of gold. And so God's holiness is reflected in the terms of gold, whereas sin is reflected more in the sense of this cheaper metal which is lead. All right, so the idea, what you have so far, sin is basically in this basket. That's the gist of it. All right, so verse 8 it says, "Then he said, 'This is wickedness.'" So now the sin or the woman has a name, and we're calling her wickedness. "And he thrust her down into the basket and threw the lead cover over its mouth." In other words, what's happening is the woman is trying to escape out of the basket, and he's pushing her back down into the basket. Okay, so what is really kind of happening here? What Christ is telling Zechariah is there's sin in the land, and you've got to get the sin out of the land. So when you read Ezra and Nehemiah, for instance, the people start, even though they've came back from captivity and they're in the land again, they start doing a lot of evil stuff again. The more wealthy ones start defrauding their neighbors. They're doing bad business practices. Some of them are actually selling each other into slavery to other countries and so forth. And so a lot of the things they were doing before they went into captivity, they're doing it again now that they're back. And so what God has said in all these visions is, okay, I agree to come back and dwell with you. You're going to rebuild the temple. He already promised that Zerubbabel would rebuild the temple. Zerubbabel will be kind of a David-like. Zerubbabel is in the line of David. He is the descendant of the last king. He's the grandson of the last king. So he will function as a governor, not as a king, but you'll have somebody from David's family leading the people. You'll rebuild the temple. I agree to live in the temple again. You have a high priest again. You have all these things that you used to have, but you have to get rid of the sin. You cannot have sin in the land. And so what has happened is, before they went into captivity, God dwelt in the temple until the sin got so bad that God left the temple. And so God and sin cannot dwell in the same place. And so back at that time, God said, I've had enough, and he leaves and lets sin reign in Jerusalem. And as a result, the people are captured, taken into captivity, and so forth. Now that the people are back, God has said, okay, I will reside in Jerusalem again, but just like before, I can't reside with sin, so that the two don't go together. So if you want me to stay here in your temple and be your God, you got to get the sin out of the land. And if you don't do that, one of us is going. Either I'm leaving, meaning God is going to leave, or the people are going back into captivity. You can't have it both ways. You can't have God there and sin there at the same time. And so that's the idea. So what Christ is doing here, the woman is trying to escape. So the people are trying to hang on to their sin. They're trying to hang on to whatever it is, idolatry that they're into. Now, they're not necessarily into idolatry in the sense of idols like they were before they went into captivity, but they're enslaved to idolatry in the sense of money, wealth, power, those kind of things, the same kind of things that appeal to us today. They're struggling with those kind of things. And so the woman, which represents this sin, is trying to escape out of the basket. But what is being shown here is that Christ is in control of all these things. And so when Christ sees that she's trying to escape, he just pushes her back in the basket and slams the lid shut and says, I'm not going to allow sin to dwell here. So this is God basically saying, I am in control. I am going to reside here with you, and I'm going to help you eliminate the sin from the land. All right, so with that in mind, it says in verse 8, we read verse 8. Verse 9, it says, Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, two women coming forward. So these are two different women, not the one in the basket, but two additional women. It says the wind was, I'm reading the ESV. Let me switch back to the New King James. Okay, verse 9. Then I raised my eyes and looked, and there were two women coming with the wind in their wings. The word wind there is the Hebrew word ruach, And it can be translated wind. It can also be translated spirit. So in Genesis chapter 1, for instance, when it says, depending on your translation, the Spirit was hovering over the waters, you can actually find a translation that does say, instead of the Spirit, it says the wind is hovering over the waters. And it's the same idea here. So the translators are having a bit of an issue. Do they want to translate this as Spirit or as wind? And if you translate it as Spirit, what you're saying is the Holy Spirit is playing a role in eliminating the sin from the land. And so you might have a translation that says Spirit. All of your translations may just say wind. But the idea that the Holy Spirit is participating in eliminating the sin from the land probably makes more sense than just saying that they're singing the Bette Midler song, The Wind Beneath My Wings. So that's probably the better idea here. So anyway, it says, coming with the wind in their wings, for they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between earth and heaven. And so why is he talking about a stork? A stork is actually an unclean type of bird. So since a stork is unclean, then a stork can remove the sin. Since they're already unclean, they can take the sin away. And so that's why it's referencing that particular bird. And so the idea is that the sin is in the basket, and the sin is going to be taken away from Jerusalem and Judah to another place, to get rid of it so that God can stay in the land, God can dwell with the people, and God can reign as their God. All right, so it says, verse 11, and he said to me, verse 10. So I said to the angel who talked with me, where are they carrying the basket? And he said to me, to build a house for it in the land of Shinar. When it is ready, the basket will be set there on its base. So two things. So it kind of sounds like God's making a place for this sin to go. It's not really what it means, okay? So where is Shinar? The other biblical reference to Shinar, if you don't remember, is the Tower of Babel. That's where that was. And the Tower of Babel was in Babylon. So Shinar is here just being used as a synonym for Babylon, okay? And so what he's saying is we're going to take all this sin that is accumulating and causing issues here in Jerusalem and Judah. We're going to take it back to Babylon, okay? Why take it back to Babylon? Because in the next vision, you're going to see that God is going to punish Babylon. So basically he's saying, all right, we're going to get this all out of here, and then we're going to punish Babylon in a minute to eliminate all this sin. Okay, so that's the gist of the idea. So vision 6 was a vision about getting the sin out of the people. The people are sinning; they have to eliminate it. Vision 7 is about getting the sin out of the land as a whole, okay, and moving it to a different location that God can deal with. Pretty short vision. Any questions on vision 7? All right, so we'll move into vision 8. So remember, so it's going to pan out more. So you're going to move now from an international vision to more of a universal vision. And vision 8 and vision 1 form what's called an inclusio, which is a fancy way of saying a bookmark, or not a bookmark, bookends. So if you look on a bookshelf and you got the two fancy things that hold up the books on each side, that's what this is. So when we read vision 8, it may make you remember some things from vision 1. And so I'll point them out as we go through. But there's a lot of similarities between vision 1 and 8, but there's also a lot of differences. And I will try to kind of highlight that as we look at it. All right, so vision 8, which is chapter 6, it says, Then I turned and raised my eyes and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were coming from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. With the first chariot were red horses, with the second chariot black horses, with the third chariot white horses, and with the fourth chariot dappled horses, strong steeds. Then I answered and said to the angel who talked with me, what are these, my Lord? So that's the first part of the vision. So the immediate thing that might come to mind, that there's a similarity here between vision 1 and vision 8, is that you have horses in both visions. And that's true. So one of the big similarities is this idea of horses. The other similarity that we'll see as we go a little deeper into it is that the horses are in control by Christ and God, okay? So that's another thing. They're both, in both visions, they're part of the heavenly council. So if you kind of remember from vision 1, they report to the heavenly council. In vision 8, they're going to depart from the heavenly council. So basically what is happening, if you go back and you look at vision 1, and we won't flip back there, I'll just sort of remind you of it. In vision 1, what is happening is there's still chaos in the land. So even though Persia is in control, Persia did not totally destroy Babylon. In other words, yeah, they killed the king and they took the land over and so forth, and so Babylon became part of Persian rule. But Persia did not eliminate all the Babylonian rulers. And so a lot of the rulers of Babylon, it looked like they were getting off scot-free. They were actually ruling there for Persia, and so they hadn't really been punished. But what happens over time is once Darius becomes king, there are some revolts in Babylon where they try to make themselves into king and try to revolt away from Persia. And Darius comes in, and he puts that down, and he deals very harshly with them. So the idea in vision 1 is that despite the fact Persia is in control and God's people are under Persian rule, God has not yet fulfilled the promises to Isaiah and Jeremiah that Babylon would be punished for their deeds and their wickedness that they did to God's people. So with all that in mind, the symbolism you see in vision 1 is that the horses and the riders of the horses have come from the four parts of the earth, and they report to Christ, but they report to him in the cover of darkness. It's at night. And the idea is that though God is in control, it's still a dark time because God has not brought vengeance for his people upon Babylon yet. Okay. When you get to vision 8, you see basically the opposite of all that. So in vision 1, the horses are coming to Christ to tell him what is going on in the land, and what is going on is Babylon hasn't been punished yet. In vision 8, the horses and chariots are part of the divine council, but they're going to be sent away from the council to go out and do something on behalf of God. So they're going the opposite direction. They're going away from the council with instructions from Christ, as opposed to coming towards the council to give God and Christ information. So they're doing two opposite things. The second thing is that the mountain, if you look at the mountain in the beginning of this, or the two mountains, it says they are mountains of bronze. It doesn't mean they're literally bronze mountains. What it means is the sunlight is shining on the mountains. In other words, remember all these visions occurred at night, on the same night. So Zechariah saw 8 visions during the same night. And what is probably happening is this last vision is actually occurring at daybreak when the sun is starting to come up. And what is happening is you see these bronze mountains, meaning the sunlight is shining on the mountains, okay? And so the idea is, back in vision 1, there's chaos in the land, and it's darkness, and it's night. But now here in vision 8, you have hope for a new day. So the day is dawning, and things are now going to start happening for God's people, and there's hope for the future that God is going to bring justice to the land and to his people and so forth. So there's an air of optimism here in vision 8 that you don't have in vision 1. Okay, so that's a lot of the compare and contrast between these two. And that's why you kind of have bookends and how these visions are similar, but there are some key differences to them. Okay, let's now keep going. If you look at the end of verse 4, you'll notice that Zechariah calls this angel Lord. He says the same thing back in vision 1. So again, this angel is Christ, just described as an angel. All right, so verse 5, it says, "And the angel answered and said to me, These are 4 spirits of heaven who go out from their station before the Lord of all the earth." So in other words, the horses are being sent out from the divine council with instructions to do something on behalf of God. All right, verse 6, "The one with the black horses is going to the north country. The white are going after them, and the dappled are going toward the south country." So it's a couple of things. One, where are the red horses going? It never mentions where the red horses go. Some people speculate maybe that part of the text got lost. I don't know. It just doesn't say where the red horse goes, so we're not really sure. But you got 2 horses going north, so you have the black and the white. So the black goes first, and then it's followed by the white. What does it mean when it goes north from Jerusalem, basically? Well, when you go north, you're actually following the Fertile Crescent, so you're actually going to Babylon. Babylon is actually east or slightly southeast of Jerusalem, but to get there, you have to go north, up, and then you ride the Fertile Crescent over to it. And so that's why it's saying it's going north, because you would go north initially before you start heading east and then back south. And so the first horse, the black horse, is going to Babylon. Why is it black? It's bringing destruction, it's bringing punishment to Babylon for what they have done to God's people. So back in vision 1, Babylon had not yet been punished for what they did. Now here in vision 8, God is saying, okay, now I'm going to bring about the punishment to Babylon that I promised to Isaiah and to Jeremiah previously. So the black horse is going to go and deal out punishment to Babylon. And then the white horse is going to follow. What does the white horse symbolize? The white horse symbolizes victory. So the fact that the white horse is going to follow the black horse means God is going to punish Babylon, and he's going to do so successfully, as he had previously promised. The dappled horse is now going to go south. What is south? South is Egypt. Egypt is a frenemy of Judah. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't. But near the end, they were not getting along. If you remember, Egypt killed Josiah, which is one of the last, or maybe the last good king of Judah. And so there was some tension between the 2 countries before Judah went into captivity. And so God is saying, okay, I'm going to go south and punish Egypt as well. Okay, so basically what is happening is God is going to punish all of Judah's enemies, both Babylon and Egypt. Okay. All right, so as you kind of move forward then, it says, verse 7, "Then the strong steeds went out, eager to go," so they're eager to go out and punish God's people, "that they might walk to and fro throughout the earth. And he said, Go, walk to and fro throughout the earth." In other words, Christ is telling the horses, okay, go and deal out the punishment that God has said that you're to do. So, all right, so it says, "So they walked to and fro throughout the earth. And he called to me and spoke to me, saying, See, those who go toward the north country have given rest to my spirit in the north country." In other words, back in vision 1, there's still chaos in the land and its darkness because God hasn't yet punished Babylon. So God's soul does not yet have peace. But now that he is dealing out the punishment that he promised he would do, he now has peace because Babylon has finally been punished. And that's the gist of the last vision. Now, what's going to follow is an oracle. what has happened so far with all the oracles is the oracle actually explains the vision that was right before it. So what you would expect in this oracle here is that it's going to explain the vision. But that's actually not what's going to happen. It's going to just add additional information that's not talked about in the vision. So this oracle is different than all the ones before it. But what you have up to this point is you still have a problem. So what God has promised in the 8 visions is, I'm going to come back and dwell with you. You're going to rebuild the temple, and I will dwell in the temple. You will have a high priest. You will have peace in the land, and God will punish all your enemies. And so all that sounds great, but what is the one thing that's still missing? They don't have a king, okay? And so for the Jewish people, the promises are that there will be somebody of the Davidic lineage on the throne for eternity. And so as you're looking at this, we have Zerubbabel, and he is the grandson of the last king, and he is a great, however many number, great grandson of David. But he's not king, he's a Persian appointed governor. So, all this sounds great, but where's our king at, okay? So you have hope for the future. Right now, you're still a poor country. You don't have any military strength. You don't really have an economy. Things aren't great, but what you have is the dawn of a new day and hope going forward based on all these promises God is making to them in these visions. But you still don't have a leader. You still don't have a king. So let's see what this last oracle here talks about. Verse 9, then the word of the Lord came to me. Remember that phrase. You see it over and over and over in the prophets. It means that what's about to come is a prophecy, and it's a legitimate prophecy directly from God. So it says, from the word of the Lord came to me, saying, receive the gift from the captives from Heldai, Tobiah, Jedediah, who have come from Babylon, and go to the same day and enter the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah. So what is being told is God is telling Zechariah to do something, and he's telling him to go meet these 4 individuals, and he gives a little more information on who the 4th one is. So we'll look first at Josiah. Josiah is the son of Zephaniah. In one of the 2 Kings, this Zephaniah, or presumably this Zephaniah, is referred to as one of the main priests. And so if that is the case, then this Josiah, who is his son, would be one of the prominent families of the people. So he's telling him to go to the house of this prominent, influential person to do something. And these 4 individuals, what you see is it says, receive the gift from the captives, or another translation may say exiles. So if you remember back in chapter 2, in that vision or oracle, God tells Zechariah that basically the people who are still in Babylon, remember they didn't all return, the people who are still there need to get out and come home before God punishes Babylon, because once God punishes Babylon, they don't have any protection there. They may go down with Babylon when Babylon goes down. So these 4 individuals somehow heard that message, and they've left Babylon and they've come home. Okay, so they've come back to Jerusalem. So the 4 are Heldai, Tobiah, Jedediah, and Josiah. Now there's some indication about their faithfulness if you look at their names. Notice 3 of the 4 end in Yah. That means they have Yahweh in their name. Okay, and so that indicates at least their parents, if not they themselves, had a pretty strong faith in Yahweh, that they would name their children with Yahweh in the name. So that tells you a little bit about them. Okay, so he says, go to Josiah's house and meet these 4 individuals and receive the gift that they have. So as we look now in verse 11, we'll see what the gift is. So it says, take the silver and gold, make an elaborate crown, and set it on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. All right, so if you remember, when the people came back, the Persian kings gave them silver and gold to go back with them to help rebuild the temple and everything. But the people also came back with silver and gold, either their own or the other Jews gave it to them as a gift to take back. So a couple things here. One, the high priest previously did not wear a crown. So they either wore a headband that you see back in the Pentateuch, or they wore what we saw earlier when Josiah was in one of the visions. He wore a turban at that time. But now God is saying to put a crown on their head, on Josiah's head. The other thing to notice is that silver and gold here, remember they're a poor nation at this point, but the silver and gold suggest wealth, and that, yes, despite the fact that you don't have much of an economy right now, a new day is dawning, God is with you, God is going to bring back wealth and prosperity to the land, okay? So you can afford to use this silver and gold to make this crown. Now, what's a little confusing is the word for crown there is actually plural, not singular. And so Zechariah is being instructed to make 2 crowns, even though it doesn't look like that in the English translation. So we're going to talk about 2 crowns here. Crown 1 is to be put on the head of Joshua the high priest. So this is an initiation ceremony where Joshua will be initiated as the high priest by placing a crown on his head. So then we'll talk about, okay, where does the second crown go? So verse 12, then speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, saying, behold the man whose name is the branch. So now we're not talking about Josiah the high priest, we're talking about a different individual at this point. And I'll just go ahead and tell you this is all messianic prophecy, okay? So we're talking about the coming Christ, who is going to be the Messiah. So crown 2 is actually the crown that goes on the Messiah's head. So this is all messianic. Now remember, the problem we're facing here is we don't have a king, right? So Zechariah is being told, make 2 crowns for 2 different roles. You're going to have a crown for a priestly crown for the high priest, and then you're going to have a separate royal crown for a coming king that will be promised, okay? All right, so with that in mind, let's look at verse 12. Okay, so it says, behold the man whose name is the branch. So what you're going to see are 7 characteristics of this coming king that will come in the future. So first one you'll notice is that he is a man, so he will be in a human form. His name is the branch. You might have some other translations, but that's probably the most common translation. From his place he shall branch out. From what place? Meaning from the line of David. He will be a descendant of David. So in other words, the promises to David will be fulfilled in this coming king. There will be a king in the line of David that reigns eternally. All right, so as you keep going, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. So he's going to build the temple. So wait a minute, I thought Zerubbabel was building the temple, you know, the guy who's currently the governor who is a descendant of David. Yes, that's true. So are we talking about the same temple? No. Okay, we're talking about a different temple now. So the temple that Zerubbabel is building is nice and all, but it won't last forever. And we know it was destroyed in AD 70. So what is this temple that we're talking about now? Well, it's twofold. One, it's the temple of Christ's body itself. Remember, Christ said, destroy this temple in 3 days, I will build it back up. But he's also talking about the temple of Christ's church that Christ himself will build. So this coming king, this coming Messiah will build his own temple separate from the one Zerubbabel is building, okay? So verse 13, yes, he shall build the temple of the Lord. He shall bear the glory, so he shall be, he will have glory. He shall sit and rule on his throne, so he shall be royal. So he shall be a priest on his throne. Okay, wait a minute. He's both royal and a king, but he's also a priest. So what you're doing is you're moving from a situation where you have a high priest and a governor, or a high priest and a king, to a single individual that plays both roles. And we know we've seen that before in the Old Testament with Melchizedek back in Genesis, that played both role of both king and high priest of God for the city of Salem, which was the precursor of the city of Jerusalem. And we know throughout the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer talks about this over and over, where Christ is both our high priest and our king. And he does compare him back to Melchizedek. But all that is being prophesied here ahead of time, that this coming king is going to be both the king and the high priest. Okay, and then as you continue forward, it says, and the council of peace shall be between them both. In other words, he's going to reunite all of God's people back together into one fold, okay? All right, so let's see if we can finish out the chapter here pretty quick. Does the first bell ring? Okay, sorry, I'm not really paying attention if it did. Verse 14, now the elaborate crown shall be for a memorial in the temple of the Lord of Helam, Tobiah, Jedediah, and Hen, the son of Zephaniah. So in other words, we're going to put crown number 1 on Josiah's head now as the high priest, but crown number 2 is reserved for this coming king who isn't here yet. So while we're waiting on him, we're going to put this crown in the temple and let it sit there and wait till its rightful owner arrives to take it, okay? So verse 15, even those from afar shall come and build the temple of the Lord, meaning this is a reference to those Jewish exiles still in Babylon, the ones that will come back before Babylon gets destroyed, just like the 4 individuals a minute ago were mentioned that came back. Additional ones are going to come back. Is that the first one? Okay, all right. Additional ones are going to come back, and when they come back, they're going to help rebuild. Also, they'll help bring in the necessary finances to help with this as well. But more of the people will come home. They're going to help rebuild. And then he says, then you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. And this is at least the second time Zechariah has said this, where he's saying, look, if you believe me or don't believe me right now, when you see this happen, then you will know that I'm a true prophet of God. So when you start seeing these Jews come from Babylon before Babylon gets destroyed, then you will know that all these things I've said are actually true, okay? And that is what happens. Some more people come back, and so that validates everything that Zechariah has been saying. And then the last line, and this shall come to pass if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God. And that is basically a quote from Exodus, from Mount Sinai. So what he's kind of capping it with here is, look, the covenant is still in play. And so based on the covenant, God has made these promises to us, but for these promises to stay valid, we have to do his will, and we have to keep our part of the covenant. If we don't do our part of the covenant, for instance, if we don't get the sin out of the land like Vision 7 was talking about and Vision 6, if we don't get the sin out of the land, then God voids the covenant, and none of this is going to happen, okay? Or he doesn't have to uphold his part of it. Now, we know he does uphold it anyway to bring Christ into the world, to save the world, but it doesn't mean each of these individuals are going to be saved if they don't keep their part of the covenant. And so it's kind of a final warning shot to the people in this chapter that if you want to see all this come collectively for all of us as well as individually, you have to keep the covenant. Otherwise, God doesn't owe us anything if we don't do our part. And so one kind of final thing I wanted to kind of mention tonight to kind of make it a little bit practical for us. At this time, Judah is a very, very weak country. They don't have a military. They don't have any wealth. They're surrounded by enemies. It is a peaceful time mostly because Persia is in control of everything, but they as a nation, they're subservient to Persia. They don't really have any power. And what God is telling them in these latter visions is, look, I know you think you're weak. I know you think you don't have any power, but I'm the one who's in control of everything. And if I tell you I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and you don't need to fear if I've told you that this is what's going to happen. And so we in the church, we sometimes feel the same way. We feel like we're outnumbered by the world around us. We don't feel like we have very many. We feel weak. We feel powerless. We feel helpless to make a difference in the world around us. But is that the promise God made to us? Or did he make the promise to us that we can influence the world around us? We do have power. We do have strength. And if we trust in him, we can do great things. Problem is do we believe that? Or do we just shrink back and say, the struggle's too big, we can't do anything? And so here, the people do heed what he says. They rebuild the temple. They have the high priest again. And things start improving for the people. The question for us is, which direction are we going to go? Are we just going to shrink? Or are we going to heed the promises God made to us and actually do something with it? And I'll leave you there with that tonight. Does anybody have any comments or questions before we stop? Okay. It's good to see everybody. Hope you have a good rest of the week.